king of German mercenaries.
Chapter 4, Meat is cheap and wheat is expensive. Marin looked around and found that there was no rope to tie the elk. In desperation, he had to pull out the green grass next to him and started to weave straw ropes on the spot. Speaking of which, even in the rural areas of later generations, there are not many young people who can weave straw ropes. Because the business of later generations is too developed, ropes made of various materials such as nylon fibers are sold in large quantities in stores. Not only are they cheap, but their quality is also better than straw ropes. Therefore, everyone went directly to buy chemical fiber ropes. In his previous life, Marin was also bored. When he was a child, he learned the skills of weaving straw ropes and straw sandals from an old widow in the village who loved to weave straw ropes and straw sandals when he was bored. Then, it happened to come in handy today. Marin tied the deer's neck with a braided straw rope, then grabbed the deer's front legs and pulled it out of the trap. Then, Marin held the warhorse in his left hand and the deer in his right hand, struggling with the deer that wanted to escape, and dragged the deer to the nearest city. The nearest city to Marin at this time was Bonn, which was under the jurisdiction of the Archdiocese of Cologne, and was also the capital of West Germany. Marin spent a long time leading the red deer to the outside of Bonn. But he was stopped at the city gate. It turns out that in ancient Europe, people had to pay a city tax to enter the city. The city tax was not high, only 2 imperial pfennigs. Theoretically, pfennigs and pennies are equivalent. But the problem is that Marin is penniless now. In desperation, Marin had to inquire about the trading market outside the city and walked to a market outside the city. You know, these days, 2 pfennigs are also very considerable for the poor, almost equivalent to a day's wages. In order to save the city entry tax, some people simply set up stalls somewhere outside the city. Of course, the local officials are not stupid. You are setting up a stall outside the city, right? Okay, I can designate a market area for you. However, people who set up stalls in the market must pay the stall tax, just like in the city. As for buyers, they don't have to pay taxes. However, there are conditions. That is, those who set up stalls outside the city must be small businesses. If your business grows big and you still want to set up stalls outside the city to save on the city entry tax, the tax officer will bring the sheriff to trouble you. Generally speaking, vendors outside the city sell cheap goods needed by the country folk, such as farm tools, coarse cloth, needles and thread, etc. As for high-priced and scarce goods such as salt, although the country folk also need them, officials absolutely do not allow vendors to sell them at the market outside the city, because this will affect their tax collection. Of course, in places too far from the city, ordinary people can also buy them at the market held every 5 days. But there are also tax collectors at the market, who keep a close eye on the merchants. Marin came to the simple market outside the city, not to sell red deer, because there would be no big buyers outside the city. He came here to collect the city entry tax. After thinking it over, Marin decided that he could not sell his warhorse, weapons and armor. But in order to collect the city tax, he had to give out one thing. After thinking about it, the only thing he could sell was the short knife. This short knife was used by Marin for survival in the wild, and it could also be used as a dagger for self-defense. It seemed to be of good quality. But Marin was hungry now. He had been eating grass roots for 2 days. When he saw someone selling black bread that could be used as a brick to hit someone in the market, he began to drool. So, he decided to quickly get the city entry tax and then sell the red deer so that he could have a normal meal. To be honest, Marin's dagger is of good quality. After all, it is for knights. If a knight loses his lance, he may have to draw his dagger and fight with others. Therefore, the quality of this kind of dagger is generally good. But now Marin couldn't care less and didn't care about selling it for a good price. So, this excellent dagger worth 20 pfennigs was sold to a butcher for 8 pfennigs. With the entrance fee, Marin happily led his warhorse and red deer into the city. But what made him depressed was that his entrance tax was 4 pfennigs. The reason was that the red deer he led was a bulk commodity, and some tax was also collected. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that Marin was a skilled knight, the soldiers guarding the city might have asked for 20 pfennigs or even an exorbitant price. Moreover, ordinary people even needed the permission of the lord to hunt. If a commoner hunted a large animal in the territory without permission, he might be executed by the lord. Only wandering knights like Marin would not be taken care of by the lords. Because wandering knights are a group of people who dare to kill people for their lives. They are highly skilled in martial arts, and ordinary lords dare not provoke them. Moreover, many wandering knights have relatives and friends, and if you provoke them, you will suffer. The soldiers guarding the city are just lowly infantry, how dare they offend the knights? Legend has it that several years ago, a baron killed a wandering knight who was hunting in his territory without permission. Then, 2 months later, a group of knights from the wandering knight's family came and killed the baron and looted the baron's manor. The baron's family took the matter to the imperial court, but it was not resolved. Although the baron's status was higher than that of the fief knight, the father of the deceased, it could not be said that he was wrong to avenge his son. Moreover, it was indeed too much for the baron to kill a knight for a mere prey. So, the matter was left alone, and in the end, the avenger simply returned the stolen property. Since then, most lords have taken this as a warning and are not willing to provoke wandering knights. As long as they do not stay in their territory for hunting for a long time, they will not pay much attention to them. Even if they are found, they will just send people to drive them away, and will not be as fierce as they treat civilians. Because these wandering knights themselves, or their families, may be thugs with high martial arts skills. Of course, if the local lords knew about the hunting of large wild animals like Marin, they might send their knights to claim them back. However, the spread of information in the Middle Ages was extremely backward, and communication basically relied on shouting. By the time the local lords learned the news and sent people to claim them, it might take 3 or 2 days. And Marin himself was just a passerby, where could he be found by then? Even if he was found, it would be useless. After all, if you catch a thief, you must seize the stolen goods. If you don't catch him on the spot, the prey will sell all the prey. Who would admit it then? Unless Marin is greedy and stays here for a long time to hunt, giving people the opportunity to catch the thief and seize the stolen goods. After finally entering the city, Marin hurried into the city and spent a long time trying to find a restaurant willing to buy the red deer. But the price made Marin so depressed that he wanted to vomit blood. Why? The restaurant owner only offered 4 pfennigs per pound of venison to buy the elk. Moreover, it was based on a 50% meat yield. In other words, the owner was only willing to pay 800 pfennigs for this venison. In addition, because he could get a very complete deer skin, as well as byproducts such as antlers for decoration, and deer bones could also be used to make soup. Therefore, the owner agreed to pay another 300 pfennigs. In other words, such a large elk could only be sold for 1,100 pfennigs. According to Marin Hoffman's memory, wheat is currently worth 5 pfennigs per pound. This price will soar after the price revolution in the 16th century, and by the 17th century, wheat per pound is almost 1 or 2 shillings or even higher. However, the price of meat seems to have been relatively stable. Even the less valuable rye is worth 1 pfennig per pound. In other words, the price of a pound of venison is not as expensive as a pound of wheat. Marin, who came from the future, is completely Spartan. You know, in modern times, the price of a pound of wheat is just over $1, while venison costs at least $20 per pound. This is for farmed venison, and if it is wild venison, it will cost dozens of dollars. In other words, the price of venison in modern times is at least 10 times that of wheat. But in medieval Europe, the price of wheat was more expensive than venison, which shocked Marin. In fact, Marin was short-sighted. You have to know that this was the Middle Ages. The current German region, excluding Hungary and other regions, but including many regions of Poland in later generations, as well as the Netherlands and some regions of France, about 500,000 to 600,000 square kilometers, had a population of less than 10 million. In later Germany, the population was as high as 80 million on a land area of 350,000 square kilometers. Therefore, the current German region is still considered to be sparsely populated. For example, there are a lot of forests along the Rhine River and in the southern mountains. In the forests, there are wild deer, wild sheep, wild rabbits, and even bison. There are actually a lot of wild animals of this kind, enough for people to hunt and eat. Not only in Germany, but also in the whole of Europe, there are many wild animals in a large area of sparse population. As long as you have a musket or are good at using a crossbow, you can definitely hunt prey frequently, have enough meat to eat, and even sell it, provided that you have the qualifications to hunt. At the same time, the level of agriculture in medieval Europe was so low that it was not even worthy of carrying shoes for the Ming dynasty of the same period. The wheat yield per mu in Europe was better except in Italy, which could reach 150 to 200 kilograms per mu. In other regions, the wheat yield per mu was generally around 100 kilograms. Of course, this is also related to the current climate. After all, this era was the Little Ice Age and the temperature was relatively low. But more of the reason was that the farming technology of Europeans was extremely low. They did not know how to apply fertilizers, and the plows they used to cultivate the land were also very backward. For example, China began to use the advanced and labor-saving curved plow in the Tang dynasty, while Europe only had two types of plows at that time, the Saxon heavy plow and the ordinary light plow. The disadvantage of the light plow is obvious, its tillage depth is very shallow, and it can only dig up the surface soil, and the effect is very poor. The Saxon heavy plow, on the other hand, is very effective. But it is too heavy and requires several horses to pull it together. European horses are larger and stronger, making them very suitable as draft horses. Therefore, horse plowing has always been popular in Europe, and cattle are relatively less used. Many cattle are raised as dairy cows or beef cattle. However, how many draft horses could an ordinary family have in Europe? Obviously, it was impossible. Therefore, only nobles and wealthy families could afford the Saxon heavy plow. Generally, poor small landowners could not afford the Saxon heavy plow. No manure was applied and the tillage was shallow. This resulted in generally low agricultural yields in Europe, leading to high food prices. On the other hand, because there were many wild animals in the wild and Europeans also engaged in extensive grazing, there was an abundant source of meat, which also led to low meat prices in Europe during this era. According to Marin Hoffman's memory, beef was only 4 pfennigs per pound at that time, while mutton and pork were only 3 pfennigs per pound. In other words, the cost of eating meat was even lower than that of eating wheat bread. Of course, rye is cheaper than meat. Therefore, poor families usually eat super hard black bread made by mixing rye, soil, sawdust, stones and wild vegetables. Why do we say cast? Because such black bread can kill people and can be used directly as bricks, which can be called the Nokia of the Middle Ages. Even the Hoffman family, a family of knights, usually ate black bread. Only on major festivals would they eat white bread made of wheat flour. Of course, the black bread eaten by the Hoffman family was different from the black bread eaten by poor families. At least, the black bread eaten by the Hoffman family was not so hard and was not mixed with dirt and other things. It was considered normal black bread. Thinking of this, Marin burst into tears. I never thought that wheat was more expensive than meat in the Middle Ages. Damn, when I read time travel novels before, I thought the author was just bragging, but I never thought that this is actually the case in reality. Before traveling through time, Marin had read many novels about traveling to ancient Europe. For example, one novel mentioned that after the 17th century, the price of wheat in Europe was extremely expensive, reaching several pounds per quarter, 7 kilograms. For this reason, the protagonist even used modern agricultural technology to grow crops and made a fortune. Well, it seems that I have to find a way to grow wheat and make a fortune. After all, Marin is a child from a pure rural background and is no stranger to farming. But the problem is, you need to have land to farm. In this era when feudal lords owned land, even if you were rich, you might not be able to buy good land. Even if you bought good land, if you really made a fortune by growing wheat, the lord might get jealous and come to rob you. After all, the Middle Ages were ruled by lords, and they were local tyrants, and the ownership of the land belonged to the lords. Therefore, Marin thought about it and decided that it would be better to go to Emperor Maximilian I. He would first help the emperor fight, then strive to gain military merit and obtain a fiefdom. Then, with the fiefdom, he would become a lord, recruit serfs, use modern agricultural technology, mass-produce wheat, and become a local tyrant in the Middle Ages. Chapter 5, Taking a Shower at a Hotel. After receiving the 1,100 pfennigs, Marin immediately found a hotel and stayed there. He had not slept in a bed for the past 2 days and felt very uncomfortable. However, the hotel prices in Bonn are quite high, with a single room costing 10 pfennigs per night. In a small hotel in a small town, 1 or 2 pfennigs per night is enough. However, it was worth the money. At least, the hotels in the small town were filthy. There were no mandatory hygiene requirements these days. The cheap hotels were generally very dirty and smelled bad. Even the quilt inside had a sour smell. This was the memory of the former Marin Hoffman who lived in a country hotel. Although the hygiene of this hotel in Bonn could not be compared with the hotels of later generations, at least there was no strange smell inside. It seemed that the owner still paid attention to cleaning. After handing the idiot Jean Macquart over to the doorman and leading him to the stable in the backyard, Marin asked the innkeeper for a large oak barrel and several basins of hot water. Obviously, Marin wanted to take a bath. Although it was early spring, you could take a bath every few days. But what frightened Marin was that his predecessor was a devout Catholic. Under the propaganda of some bastard bishops, many believers believed that bathing would lead to disease. Therefore, many Catholics did not take a bath for many years. For example, the famous Sun King Louis XIV took only 7 baths during his 72 years on the throne. Then, this guy's lover was actually fainted in bed by the strange smell on his body. Well, the above is a complaint about the Sun King. In this era, people in high positions, especially kings, dukes, etc., are most afraid of death. And some stupid bishops preach that if you take a bath, people will easily get sick and die. Therefore, people who are afraid of death will not take a bath. And knight families like the Hoffman family, who are ready to die at any time, are not so afraid of death. But due to religious beliefs, the people of the Hoffman family can only take a bath several times a year. According to the memory of the predecessor, the Hoffman family usually takes more baths in summer and autumn. Because in the summer, when knights are training, they sweat too much and have to take a bath. And in the autumn harvest season, they sweat a lot when harvesting rye. The Hoffman family personally went to the fields to participate in the autumn harvest, and they also need to take a bath. As for other seasons, the climate in Europe is cool. Therefore, the Hoffman family takes fewer baths in other seasons. For example, it is already the end of March. But Marin remembers that he took a bath in this body around Christmas. Oh my God, I didn't even feel that I stink these past 2 days. Marin was shocked. In fact, this is not surprising. In the past 2 days since Marin came here, he has been busy thinking about how to survive. How could he think about hygiene? Moreover, it is difficult for ordinary people to detect the strange smell on their bodies. Unless they are really too smelly. Resisting the urge to vomit, Marin waited for the hotel staff to deliver a large oak barrel and hot water. Then, Marin began to take a bath in the room. This hotel is run by Jews. Jews do not believe in Catholicism, and many of them travel between Europe and the Middle East and are well informed. Bathing is very popular in the Middle East, especially in Turkey, and Turkish baths are very famous. Therefore, Jewish hotels are generally cleaner than local hotels, and they also provide hot water for people to take a bath. Of course, the cunning Jews charge a little more. Entering the big oak barrel, because there was no soap. In fact, soap was sold in Europe at that time, but it was expensive, costing 10 pfennigs apiece, and generally only nobles and wealthy people could afford it. Marin had to rub his body with his hands to remove the dirt. Who knew that when he rubbed his hands, he got his hands full of dirt? Young people have a relatively active metabolism, and after not taking a shower for more than 3 months, the dirt is naturally very thick, as if there is an extra layer of skin. Fortunately, Marin took a shower in time, which made him feel refreshed and he felt that he had lost several pounds. But after taking a shower, Marin found another problem: he had no clean clothes to change into. However, this is not surprising. The people in medieval Europe were sloppy. In addition, the original owner of this body was just a 16-year-old boy. How could he take care of himself? Therefore, there were only a few dirty clothes in the clothes package. In desperation, Marin changed into the cleanest set of clothes. Then, he walked out of the hotel and, under the guidance of the hotel owner, went to a tailor shop. Obviously, Marin wanted to buy clothes. But the price of ready-made clothes also shocked Marin. A set of ordinary clothes made of linen cost 15 pfennigs, and woolen clothes were even more expensive, costing more than 30 pfennigs. You know, in this day and age, the average worker only earned 2 pfennigs a day. A craftsman only earned 3 pfennigs a day. 15 pfennigs was almost equivalent to the salary of a strong man working for 7.5 days. Fortunately, Marin had obtained enough money from a large red deer before. Otherwise, he couldn't afford a set of clothes. Marin originally planned to buy a few more sets of clothes for changing, but he only bought 2 sets of linen clothes to take back. After returning to the hotel, Marin had planned to throw away the dirty and worn-out clothes in his bag. But now, Marin silently picked up the wooden basin and went to the well to wash the clothes. At dinner, Marin spent 6 pfennigs, asked for a piece of black bread and a roast goose, and had a big meal. However, Europeans have poor cooking talent, and the roast goose tasted tasteless and only salty. This is not surprising. At that time, the great voyages had just begun and Europeans had not yet occupied the spice production areas of Southeast Asia. Therefore, the price of spices in Europe was comparable to gold and was very scarce. Generally, only nobles and rich people would add spices such as ginger, aniseed, cinnamon, and nutmeg when eating meat. Ordinary people would just add a little salt. It is said that in Orthodox Russia, the highest etiquette for entertaining guests is to serve white bread made of wheat and salt. While eating the tasteless roast goose, Marin began to have wild thoughts again. If he relied on his half-baked Chinese cooking skills to open a Chinese restaurant in Europe in this era, he would make a lot of money. Marin fell into why. But soon after, he came to his senses. This era was not a rule of law era. Yes, he used Chinese cooking skills, which could make his business prosperous in a short period of time and make Europeans eat so much. However, the secret recipe of cooking skills would inevitably be coveted by others. And it would be difficult for him to protect himself. The reason is simple. In the Middle Ages, it was the era of aristocrats. In this era, aristocrats owned everything, and the lives of common people were worthless. If you have a cooking secret recipe, but you have no status, then any aristocrat will dare to send someone to capture you, and then torture you to get the secret recipe. Then, in order to monopolize the market, this aristocrat may restrict your freedom, or even kill you. Marin, who has watched too many The Palace and The Legend of Zhen Huan, couldn't help but shudder when he thought of this. It's too scary. After all, if you want to survive in the Middle Ages, you still need to have a noble status. Marin sighed, stuffed the roast goose on the plate in front of him into his mouth, and then went back to his room to rest with a lot on his mind. Chapter 6, Horseback Archery is a Skill. The next morning, after getting up and washing up, Marin ate a piece of black bread without any dirt on it, and after simply filling his stomach, he went out shopping. Last night, Marin thought about it for half the night and became more determined to join the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I. Because, although Maximilian I was a poor guy, as an emperor, he could give himself a high enough status. As a time traveler, and having read so many time travel novels, I have a lot of ways to make money in my mind. But in this era of aristocracy, if you don't have status, no matter how much wealth you have, you can't keep it. Therefore, Marin needs to rely on the emperor to obtain a high enough social status to prevent others from coveting his wealth. And how to obtain social status, that is, title. It's very simple: military merit. As a history graduate, Marin has read Western history and knows that in the 30 Years' War, in the 17th century, there were two talented military strategists, Wallenstein and Tilly, who came from humble origins but became great nobles by virtue of their military exploits. These two big men all came from ordinary declining noble families, not from great noble families. However, by commanding mercenaries to fight for the great nobles, these two losers in the aristocratic world managed to become a duke, Wallenstein, and a count, Tilly, respectively. Marin may not have the talent of Wallenstein, but he has no problem to be on par with Tilly, who conquered the world with only one set of Spanish Grand Phalanx. At least, he knows how to play the Spanish Grand Phalanx. The original creator of the Spanish Grand Phalanx, General Córdoba, had to wait until 1503 to figure out the prototype of the Spanish Grand Phalanx that has been in use for more than a century. But Marin is very clear about this tactic. Marin even knew about the Dutch Maurice Phalanx, which was more powerful than the Spanish Phalanx, and the Gustav Line formation, which was close to modern battle formations. As for the artillery tactics of taking the dwarf, that's even more unnecessary. As for the tactics after the mid-19th century, it's useless to think about it. Because there are no such advanced weapons. After all, Marin is a liberal arts student. Although he has learned science well, he is not a professional. Therefore, he can only make a flintlock rifle or something. If he wants to make a breech-loading rifle, he can't solve the primer technology. This technology requires professionals in chemistry to solve. Of course, the above is purely Marin's YY. If you want to display your talent, you must first get into the mercenaries recruited by Maximilian I. Otherwise, nothing can be achieved. In order to infiltrate the German mercenaries formed by Maximilian I, one must first reach Vienna, the home of the Habsburg family. After recovering Austria from the Kingdom of Hungary in 1490, Maximilian I moved his office from the Duchy of Burgundy back to Vienna. Although the emperor often stayed in Innsbruck in western Austria, many important matters were still handled in Vienna. Major matters such as recruiting soldiers were definitely handled in Vienna. Now, to join the army, one must go to Vienna. However, the distance from Bonn to Vienna is about 800 kilometers, or more than 1,600 li. Marin was now wearing heavy armor and carrying a huge knight's spear. Although Karl was a good warhorse, with such a heavy load, he could only walk more than 100 miles a day, and he had to stop and go, otherwise he would not be able to bear it. In fact, when a plate armor knight goes to war, he will bring 5 attendants with him to help him carry his armor and lance. Before the battle, he is also responsible for putting on the plate armor and helping the knight onto the warhorse. Fortunately, Marin didn't have plate armor pants, otherwise, he wouldn't be able to get on the horse. Because the plate armor pants are made of all metal, they are heavy and inconvenient, which is a big hindrance to the knight getting on the horse. Marin calculated that it would take at least 10 days to get to Vienna. He had less than 1,000 pfennigs left, which was not enough. Because he needed about 15 pfennigs a day to stay in the hotel and eat, usually about 5 pfennigs were for meals, and the food was pretty good. And the damn war horse Karl ate more than him, eating 10 pfennigs of feed a day. War horses are very delicate. If they are allowed to eat grass for a month or so without being fed with feed, they may not be able to carry a knight in heavy armor. Because warhorses' feed is mainly oats, there was no soybean in Europe at that time. Soybean was still in East Asia and India, and was not introduced to Europe until the 18th century at the earliest, and eggs from time to time. These things were relatively expensive in medieval Europe with backward agriculture. Marin is not the kind of person who would make a quick buck and then sit back and enjoy the fruits of his labor. In order to reach Vienna safely, Marin decided to try hunting along the way to improve his life. After all, in his previous life, Marin often went hunting in the mountains behind his hometown with his homemade English longbow during holidays, and he had good archery skills. After making up his mind, Marin began to pay attention to the shops selling bows and arrows while shopping in Bonn City. After walking around a few streets, Marin quickly found a weapon shop that sold bows and arrows. Looking at the dazzling array of bows and arrows in the weapon shop, Marin frowned. Why? Because the shop didn't have the English longbow that Marin was most familiar with. Marin later made an English longbow himself and used it to hunt many times in the back mountain of his hometown. Therefore, Marin only came into contact with one kind of bow and arrow, and was only proficient in one kind, the English longbow. Although Marin did not use yew wood to make the English longbow, but used the very common willow wood in China, Marin was used to the English longbow. The biggest difference between the English longbow and other bows is that the bows of other bows are bent and fixed by force, and then heated by fire to force them to fix their shape. Although this method is more efficient, it will damage the tension of the bow and reduce the range. If you want to get a higher range, you can only use a hard bow with greater pulling force. The bow of the English longbow is bent by bow training. The wooden strips used to make the bow will be fixed on a bracket, and then the two ends of the wooden strips will be tied with ropes. Then, the bow trainer will pull the rope and hang it on a node not far away, causing wooden strip to begin to bend slightly. After a period of time, the wooden strip adapts to this curvature, and then the curvature is increased. Repeatedly, until the wooden strip adapts to the curvature required for making a longbow. In fact, the secret of making the English longbow was a British secret for a long time. Because the English longbowmen were the British's trump card. It was not until around 1596, in the late reign of Elizabeth I, when the British officially gave up the longbowmen, that the secret of the British bow training became popular. But by then, Europe was already dominated by muskets. However, the reason why longbowmen were eliminated was not because they had poor killing ability, but because the cost of training longbowmen was too high. An excellent longbowman might need more than 10 years of training, or at least a few years. For example, Marin was skilled in using the English longbow in his previous life, and it took him 7 or 8 years to gradually master archery and hunting. At the beginning, Marin's archery was even less reliable than the Chinese national football team's shooting. After all, he had no famous teacher to guide him, and he practiced archery with the help of the internet. Even the making of the English longbow was made according to the steps in a post he saw on the internet around 2006. Longbowmen need so much time to train, but musketeers only need 1 or 2 weeks of training. In battle, no matter how long you train, whether you are hit by arrows or gun bullets, you will still die. The cost of training longbowmen was very high for the British. In fact, longbowmen became a privileged class in Britain second only to the knight class. And every death of a longbowman was a huge loss for Britain. The musketeers were different. Any honest serf could be trained for a week or 2 and then he could fight with a musket. Even if he died, it would be easy to replace him. If all the musketeers died, at most they could capture another batch of strong men and train them for a week or 2. But if the longbowmen were destroyed as a whole, it might take them many years to recover. Moreover, the biggest difference between longbowmen and musketeers is that musketeers can deal with enemies wearing plate armor, while longbowmen are somewhat helpless against plate armor. For various reasons, the British finally gave up the longbowmen that they were once proud of and turned to musketeers. However, the musket actually became popular after the Spanish phalanx appeared in 1503. Now it is 1494, and the musketeers have not yet appeared. Even the matchlock gun did not appear until around 1450. In those days, technology could not be promoted as quickly as it would later. The matchlock had been around for more than 40 years, but few people had noticed its excellent combat effectiveness. Similarly, the flintlock appeared in France at the end of the 16th century, but it was not until the mid-17th century that it gradually became popular.